Hello and welcome back to Project 380. It's yet another day working on the fire damaged Mark 1. So in the last video I done a full wiring harness change after there was a little electrical fire, and now it's misfiring. So it appears cylinder 1 and 4 are not firing whatsoever. So in this video hopefully we're going to get this running right, and I'm going to take you through my thought process of how I diagnose this problem. So cylinder number 1 and cylinder number 4 are not firing whatsoever. Cylinder 2 and 3 are fine. Now cylinder 1 and 4 actually work off one coil pack, and 2 and 3 work off another. So it's obviously an issue with this coil pack here, but we're going to start with the basics. I'm going to change the spark plugs out of matter of course. I am certain it's not going to be the spark plugs, but we're going to change them anyway. So that is the spark plugs changed. I really don't think it's going to be the spark plugs, as they really don't look too bad. Even on cylinder 4, not even that wet. The electrodes and the straps are alright, they're just a little bit old. I have seen a lot of people change their spark plugs and get their spark plug sockets stuck. This Trident spark plug tool is pretty much the best I've found for this job, and if you're interested, the part number is T32216. It makes this a lot easier. Now I would have liked to change the HT leads at the same time, but I know these HT leads are fairly new. They're not burnt on the caps, there's no frayed wires, all the rubbers and all the boots are alright, and they're all connected properly. So with the spark plugs changed and the HT leads presumably okay, let's start it and see whether that makes a difference. I'm going to assume not. Well, it finally started. Still running pretty rough. Yep, cylinder 1 still doing nothing. So still misfiring on cylinder 1 and 4, which is pretty much what I expected. The next thing I'd look at, after the cheaper option, is the coil pack. So if we take a look at a new coil pack, you can see there is 2 separate coils, just held in one big bracket. So is it an issue with this coil, but in that coil pack? Now, these are pretty expensive, but I just happen to have one laying about, so we'll give that a go. This is only held on with 3 bolts. This bottom one, right down the back of the engine, about there somewhere, is pretty difficult to get to. But the other 2 are here and here. So I'll start off by stripping the HT leads off. Remember what order they go in. Unplugging both the coils down the back here. You can see the plugs on the new coil pack there. A little bit difficult with the brake line and the clutch line in the way up here, so be careful of them. And then we'll undo those 3 bolts. So, old coil pack out, it doesn't look too bad. This bottom bolt is a nightmare to get to, but I can't see anything physically wrong with coil 4 and 1. No cracks, no burns, all looks fine. So let's change it out with this new one. If you are buying a new coil pack, be careful as they are different between 1.6 and 1.8. And there is a difference between 3-pin and 4-pin. I believe the 4th pin actually runs the tachometer on some models, but I know I've chosen the right one, as they are identical. coil pack all changed now? Could it be as simple as a coil pack? I'm very skeptical. Nope, still running on only 2. And it's still cylinder 1 and 4. So where do we go from here? The spark plugs are changed, the coil pack's changed. I'm pretty sure the HT leads are good, but we have changed the whole wiring loom. So the first thing I'm going to check is to see whether we've accidentally damaged a pin in the ECU or the new plug. So let's unplug that. So it's this port here we're looking at, and that looks absolutely fine. And the plug, that looks absolutely fine too. So because I've done a whole wire and loom swap, I think I'm going to test the continuity between this plug here and this plug here to make sure that new wiring harness is okay. So I've unplugged that one in the engine bay, and it's got 4 wires to it. A solid black, a black and a white, a brown, and a brown and yellow. And if we can see just down here, the coil pack 1 and 4 is the brown and yellow wire. So I'm going to put my multimeter on the brown and yellow wire on this plug. Just like that, I've connected it to an extension, which I've bought specially for this. Connected to the multimeter, I'm going to switch that to continuity and press this so it makes a sound if there's a good connection. So now I'm going to take the other probe and I'm going to back probe the brown and yellow wire in the plug to the ECU. So that beeping means there is a good solid connection. And because of that, we know there is not a broken wire between the ECU and the coil pack. So surely it can't be a wiring issue. Because this is a 4-pin plug that runs both coil packs, we also know it isn't a supply issue to the coils. Because the power and the earth split off from this plug, these 2 wires feed both coil packs. And because we know coil pack 2 and 3 are working absolutely fine, we know it's not a power or earth issue. So what next? So I've plugged the ECU back in, plugged the coil pack wire back in, but I've back probed the brown and yellow wire to coil pack 4 and 1. Let's pop the multimeter to voltage. Turn the ignition on, but not the car. So we've got 3 volts at the coil signal wire. So it's definitely not a wiring issue with the signal wire. Just out of curiosity, I'm going to back probe the other signal wire for the other coil. Well, that's strange. 0.06 volt. That hasn't cleared things up at all. So 3 volt on the signal wire for coil pack 1 and 4, and basically nothing on 2 and 3. So here's what I'm thinking. On a Mark 1, you haven't got a crank or cam signal. What you have is a CAS down the back here. Bit of a better look at it. But the CAS is the cam angle sensor. I'm thinking that is just in the right position to start firing coil pack 4 and 1, but not 2 and 3. Which would explain why we've got power to 4 and 1 and not 2 and 3. So, what now? I've got a couple of concerns. When I was changing this wire and loom, obviously I had to get under here and unplug the ECU. A very common problem with MX-5s is the passenger footwell getting damp. And this one was absolutely soaked. It's a bit dry now as it's been weeks, but the carpet was wet. And right underneath the carpet is the ECU. So has the ECU got water damage? But my other concern is because the electrical fire went from here all the way behind the dash and over the other side, that is where those coil pack wires go. They go from the ECU up here over to the right hand side of the dash and through the bulkhead into the engine bay behind the brake booster and to this plug. And if you remember from my last video, that is exactly where the electrical fire went. So I'm very concerned the electrical fire that went round in exactly the same place as the coil wires may have shorted those signal wires and caused damage to the ECU or water damage in the ECU. So I think we should unplug that, get it up on the bench and pull it apart. Up on my temporary, not temporary workbench now, and we've got the ECU in the case. So let's flip it over, undo these 4 screws and take the back casing off. Nothing looks burnt or water damaged there. I can't obviously see any components that are fried. So let's take this last screw off here. so we can take the board out of the case, pop a rag down because I've got a metal workbench, and flip the board over, and even on this side I can't obviously see any components that are fried and no water damage. All the pins in the end, they seem fine, corrosion free, none of them are bent. So what is happening? So I've taken a good amount of time looking over this board. I can't see any burnt or exploded components, no broken wires, no loose solder, and no swollen capacitors. But that still doesn't mean this ECU is faulty. It could be a broken ignition driver in this ECU, which I won't be able to see unless I bench test it and possibly have a thermal camera. So I'm going to put this back in its case and back in the car and try something a little bit risky. But maybe before I try something risky, let's try something very simple. I have tie wrapped the spark plug with the HT lead onto the PCV valve, just touching the inlet manifold, and we are going to check coil pack number 1 for a spark right here. Absolutely nothing. So that has confirmed it is a spark problem and not a fuel problem. So now I think I'm going to confirm it's the ECU rather than a wiring or coil pack problem. So we know for definite that coil pack 4 and 1 is the brown and yellow wire, and coil pack 2 and 3 is just the brown wire. So I'm going to try something a little bit risky, but it may confirm a few suspicions. These two plugs are exactly the same, so I'm going to plug them into the opposite coils. Now I know it's not going to run like that, as it's going to be sparking on the wrong stroke. So we know for definite what two wires down here in this plug are for the coils, the brown and the yellow. So what I'm going to do is unplug that plug from the ECU and swap the brown and the yellow and the brown around. Hopefully this won't cause any issues, but hopefully that'll mean it's misfiring on cylinder 2 and 3, but firing on 1 and 4, which will confirm for definite that it's an ECU problem. So I've got the old burnt wiring harness here, and this is the ECU plug we need. If you put a pick in this rectangle part just here on the plug, slide that out just a little bit. That won't come out all the way. And then from the other side of the plug, find out what wire you want and put a D-pinning tool in the square and push it out. And the same with the other coil. Push that out, and all I'm going to do is swap those two wires over. Push them in until they click and push this rectangle back down. Now I'm obviously going to do that to the wiring harness inside the car. So brown and yellow wires swapped over now. In theory this should work, but let's give it a go. So yes, still misfiring. And to confirm that, I've got HT lead number 2 on a spark plug to the inlet manifold. And no spark. So I think there is a slight bit of damage in the ECU. Now the only problem with this has got an inbuilt immobilizer, which is a ring around the key here and then a little module down in the steering column. And that is what this little red bit is in the end of the key. That is the key transponder. So not only do I have to change the ECU, but I have to change the key, which means I have to change the barrel. So I really didn't want to put an ECU in this, and to double check everything I got my good friend Charlie over to help me run some more diagnostics, do some wire checking and get a second opinion. So as a matter of course we changed the HT leads just to some cheap ones for now, and there was no difference. But while Charlie was checking the HT leads with the engine running, he was leaning on the engine like this and accidentally elbowed the throttle. Now let me turn the ignition on and I'll show you what happened. So just the ignition on, not the engine running, ever so slightly touch the throttle. Okay, I'm not sure why it's not doing it now, but when we done this the other day, slightly touch the throttle and the fans would come on, indicating that there's a short inside the ECU. Well, I'm not sure why that isn't doing that now, and it seems completely random, but because of this issue, and obviously the non-firing issue on 1 and 4, me and Charlie came to the conclusion that it was the ECU at fault. So I've gone ahead and ordered an ECU from Suffolk Mazda, which included the immobilizer unit on the key barrel, a key, and the key barrels for the rest of the car. So I'm going to swap all of those over into the car, and fingers crossed, that solves our issues. So swapping the ECU over is nice and easy. Just unplug the old one, plug in the new one. I'm going to have to switch over this bottom bracket as the new one for some reason hasn't come with one. So I'll just nick that off the old ECU. Just 2 screws on the side. I'm going to disconnect the battery first as a matter of safety. So that's all swapped over now. New ECU and the old one is out. And as you can see, that is a BP U2B. And the new ECU is also a BP U2B. So those ECUs should be completely identical. The only difference being the immobilizer. So now we need to change over the key barrel and the immobilizer unit itself. Let's start off with the key barrel. So that means this steering cowl is going to have to come back off. All of that is off and out of the way now. But looking at the new barrel, you can see it's held onto the steering column, and on top are 2 security bolts. And as you can see, when they removed it from the old car, they have cut slits in it to unscrew those screws. So just as a precaution, just in case the new ECU and the new keys don't work, I'm not going to spend loads of time trying to get the old barrel off. I'm going to trick the car by plugging in this new immobilizer on the new barrel into the plugs on the car and using both the old key in the old barrel and the new key in the new barrel, as this is going to work the immobilizer, and hopefully that works. If that all works, then I'll take the time to take the old barrel off and put the new one on. So I'm going to change the second immobilizer unit, which is underneath the dash, somewhere about here. And you simply unplug the old one and plug in the new one. I'm not sure if you can see it, but there is the bonnet release. The immobilizer unit is right there. A little bit tricky to get to. Old immobilizer out and the new one in. Now all I'm going to do is unplug this white plug from the steering column and plug in the white plug to the new key barrel. Well, that can just sit there for a minute, and that has got the new key in it already. So that's the ECU changed and both parts of the immobilizer temporarily changed. I'm going to connect the battery back up. Let's give this a go. Fingers crossed this works, because after this I don't know where to go. Now that sounds better. That is a smoother engine. Sounds loads better. That's loads better. I'm very relieved that worked. So now that we know that all works fine, I'm going to have to put the new ignition barrel into its new home, which means removing those security bolts here and here. I think I'm going to have to take the steering wheel off to do that, and then put all this back together. Well, what I've decided to do instead is remove the cluster so I could get access to them security bolts there, there and there. I'm going to attempt to drill those out. But before I do that, looking at the new key barrel, I've got 3 screws there, there and there, which I'm going to try undo. You can see the holes there and one just there. Unscrew the electric part of the barrel there and then try safely drill it out. And I'm also going to put the key in the old barrel. Looking at the old barrel, we can see why. If we take the key out, you can see the steering lock popped up right there. And that's going to stop us getting this off properly. So by keeping the key in, that steering lock should stay retracted. That is all unscrewed now, and the electric part of the barrel is off. To get these screws off, I sort of cheated a little bit and used a really long, thin screwdriver. But now that's all off, I'm going to really carefully drill those security bolts. Well, that took ages and made a complete mess. There is metal shavings everywhere. But with that out of the way, it's time to give this a good clean up and install the new one. That is the new key barrel in place. I did have to align the key barrel to the steering column. To do that, I got it roughly in place and then took the key out, which let the steering lock go up and lock the barrel in place. When the barrel was in place, I then screwed in this top clamp, tightened it down, then attached the hand controls to the key barrel. Now that's all in and working, it's time to put the cluster back in and the steering cowl. So that is all back together now. ECU is back in place and the carpets are back in. The headlights are both back in place, but I've found some issues. This headlight, very wobbly, and I don't know whether we can see on camera, but that bolt right there that holds it to the chassis, that is loose. Not because the bolt is loose, but actually because the headlight bracket itself has worn away, causing this headlight to wobble. And this light too very wobbly. The linkage down here is completely worn away, allowing for excess movement. This leads me on to the theory that this relay blew because I reckon one of these headlights got jammed up. There's evidence that this one got jammed up as it's been rubbing on the bumper, and this one probably got jammed up because the linkage seized. The owner of the car may not have realised that the headlights were trying to go up and blew the relay, but that doesn't explain why the fuse in the fuse box didn't blow. So I'm going to give it a go. I'm going to put the relay in and hope for the best, as this is the last part of the car to be put back together. That relay's been back in for a while now. I've been keeping an eye on it. It hasn't got hot at all. None of the wires have got hot, and everything is working how it should. Now what I have done, because I fear this might blow again if these headlights aren't sorted, I have unplugged the motors both sides, and I'm just going to tell the owner to keep the headlights up until this arm is replaced and this whole light bracket is replaced, just in case that has caused that relay to blow. So after months of fault finding and waiting for parts, that is another MX-5 saved from the car park in the sky. So thank you everyone for your helpful input, and a big thank you to Charlie who helped me out loads. So it's now time to return this car to its rightful owner. Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next one, where hopefully I'll be working back on this.